Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, although it's early in Europe. I selected this panel because it's not the earliest one, but thanks for having me. I thought I would make 3 points, and of course I'm speaking from a European perspective. I will talk about China's main goals in the region, Russia's, and what are they doing together in the Indo-Pacific. I have one preliminary remark, and I think it's important to say that neither Russia nor China subscribe to this concept of the Indo-Pacific. There is no official document in which the Chinese would use this because from the Chinese perspective, it's associated with the Quad and with this whole effort or perceived effort of the United States to contain China. So there is no use. There is in academic literature you can find Indo-Pacific, but not in official documents. Now, I think some things about China have already been said, but let's start with what is the main focus of China in the Indo-Pacific, if we call it that. I think it's Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. So East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, this is where China has its maritime claims and territorial claims to certain islands in the East China Sea, to Taiwan unification, and South China Sea, where it basically claims the whole maritime area. So these are the focal points from the Chinese perspective. And then the Indian Ocean is more the linkage to Africa. There are investments in ports, etc. And we have to say that China has very deep economic intertwinement with the region, including with the allies of the United States in the region, Japan, Korea, Australia. They all have very strong economic links with China, which, despite the efforts to diversify away from China, this is not so easily done. It was already mentioned that China now has the biggest navy in the world. I think since the 1990s, it has been very systematic in building up this blue water navy, in contrast to the coastal defense they were focusing on before. So this is basically aimed at pushing for their maritime claims in the East China Sea to the South China Sea, and of course also to make the claim of Taiwan credible. But the ambitions go beyond. We see the investments in ports, for example, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, and with Djibouti. China also has a first military base abroad in the Middle East. So we see the ambition, and we have to say that also China is a member of all regional organizations, at least all the ones that are centered around Southeast Asia. So the ARF, ADMM Plus, East Asia Summit, they're a member of APEC and also a central part of the Free Trade Agreement, RCEP. So I would say the approach of China to the region is a very comprehensive one. The economic footprint is strong, military presence is strong, diplomatic efforts, and there is also a dimension of coercive power, which China uses on a regular basis if countries don't behave, so to speak. And the main goals are unification with Taiwan, pushing through the maritime claims and limit the influence of the United States. Now, with Russia, it's very different because the economic footprint of Russia in the region is, compared to China, relatively small. Russia also joined in the second half of the 90s these regional organizations, including APEC, the ASEAN Regional Forum, ADMM Plus, and East Asia Summit. But economically, it has a much more limited impact in the region. Basically, it's about arms sales, and here the old friends of Russia come into play very strongly, India and Vietnam. And then, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, energy is also a major economic dimension for Russia, where basically China and India replace the broken European supply chain we have heard before. And all this also demonstrates that Russia is not as isolated as the Europeans would like it to see with the sanctions and everything. And then this brings me to my third point and last point. What are China and Russia doing together? The previous speaker already talked about the deep links between China and Russia and the convergence of views. I would say the convergence has limits, but also this relationship and partnership has not fallen from the sky. It has been built up gradually in the 1990s, from the 1990s, early 1990s onward, and we already see in the second half of the 90s some of the elements, the criticism of the US, NATO, the alliance system as remnants of the Cold War. These elements are already there in the 1990s. And we see that also China and Russia often speak with a unified, whether coordinated or not, voice in these regional organizations when it comes to crisis prevention or conflict prevention, for example. But the main cooperation we see are military exercises. That's very clear. Since 2003, there have been over 100 military exercises jointly held by China and Russia. In the beginning, probably more arms sales shows from the Russian side, but now it's really military exercises where both parties show. First of all, Russia shows that despite the war in Ukraine, it can still do this kind of scale of maritime and aerial exercises. So these exercises take place in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea, but also in the Baltic Sea, in the Gulf of Finland, and even in the Mediterranean. And then we have trilateral exercises that include Iran, and one exercise that included South Africa. So this is a clear signal from both sides that they sort of mutually support their respective core interests, if you will. But it also shows that the European theater and the East Asia theater, if you want to call it that, are linked together. And the latest signal or symbol of this linkage between these two theaters is the inclusion of North Korean soldiers in the war in Ukraine. And I leave it at that. Thank you.